if you were to Google noble purpose, and you'd see a lot of results all around Lisa McLeod and all about her celebrated research, how customer-centric, purpose-driven organizations create meaning at work for employees, plus positive financial results for all. Can have both. In fact, Lisa is the global expert on purpose in business. Let me tell you why. She has made sure of all of the research that has been done, over 19 plus years of research. 174 plus organizations have been transformed through her work. 1.7 million people have been inspired. And at last count, there's 73,000 followers on her LinkedIn profile. She has authored, as we've mentioned, 3 books, including Selling with Noble Purpose, as I mentioned, which was a national bestseller, and Leading with Noble Purpose, How to Create a Tribe of True Believers. And that is going to be the focus of this morning. We will post in chat how you can obtain your own copy of each one of these books. And we always try to feature a small book store owner so that we can, buy from them and to try and help and support our small business owners. All right, so that'll be in chat. Well, we're especially grateful to Lisa because she is, as I've said, a really sought after keynote speaker, as well as a strategy consultant and executive advisor to companies who struggle, frankly, to land on the right answers to employee and customer engagement. So we're very, very pleased to host Lisa McLeod this morning. So welcome, Lisa.
Hi, good morning. It's a delight to be here with you all today.
Well, we're going to dig right in because we've got there's so much rich material here. So I want to really dig in quite right away. And that is, how did you land on noble purpose?
It's a 2-part story. So I'm going to jump into this. And as I'm telling this story, what I'd invite everyone to think about is think about a time when you were at your best at work, when you were really at your best. So reflect on that. And as I tell this story, I want this session to be, our time together, to be really personal here. I want you to be able to walk away with something that you can tether yourself to keep you inspired and keep you motivated on the good days and on the bad days. So let me tell you the story. It started in sales. And my background is in sales. I've been a sales consultant for many years. And a client hired my team and I to try to identify what differentiated their top salespeople. And all of you, if you're not in sales, you know the lexicon of sales is numbers. And we know who the top salespeople are. Like, it shows up in the numbers. It's not arbitrary. But what this client wanted to identify was, what are the behaviors and qualities that made them the top salespeople? And what's interesting is, if you've had salespeople call on you, so I'm gonna ask. I probably have already given away the store because you know the title of the book, but I'm gonna ask in the chat how many of you have ever had salespeople call on you. Just put a yes or no if you've ever interacted with a salesperson. The thing is, usually we know the difference between a good salesperson and a poor salesperson. It's pretty easy to spot. Good salespeople know their product. They know their customer. They go out and make sales calls. They listen. Like, we've got a pretty distinct set of behaviors that we can train to. Mm-hmm. But what's harder to discern is what's the difference between good and excellent. And that's what this client wanted us to find out. But they went about it in an interesting way because they were a science-based company. So they wanted us to do it as a blind study. So we go out in the field and work with these salespeople. We didn't know who the top performers were. All we knew is everyone we're with is either a good performer or exceptional. So I see lots of folks that bad salespeople call on them. So you know that half of them are terrible. Well, we weren't worried about those people. We were looking at the good and the exceptional. And they sold this biotech drug. So we go out, we work with these salespeople, And we're looking for that magic thing, that thing that makes the top performers distinct. And we spent time in the field with them. We asked them questions. We did one-on-one interviews. They were calling on doctors, big medical, organizations. And so we're near the end of the study. And I had what ended up being, for me, and subsequently for several others, a life-changing experience. And I was in the car with this one sales rep. I'd been with her for 2 days. We're at the Phoenix airport. See, this was a long story. I told you it was, but hopefully you get it. We're at the Phoenix airport. It's hot as the blazes. They give you that BS. Oh, it's a dry heat. It's still hot. And this is like 10 years ago. I've got on a suit and pantyhose and blah. So I don't want to get out of the car just right that second to, wolf it up to the airport. So I asked her this question. I said, what do you think about when you go on sales calls? And she kind of looks around the car and she says, well, I don't tell this to very many people, but I always think about this one particular patient. This is where it starts. I'm asking you to think about, when were you at your best at work? So she goes on and she tells the story of being in a doctor's office with her suit and her name badge on. Little old lady comes up to her and says, excuse me, miss, are you the representative for this drug? She says, yes, ma'am, I am. Little old lady says, well, I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for giving me my life back, because your drug has enabled me to get on a plane, fly across the country, visit my grandkids, get down on the floor and play with them. So you give me my life back. So this sales rep in a biotech company, and I should mention, in a biotech company, most of the sales reps have master's degree in some kind of science, because they're talking to high-end people. She's getting all emotional, and I'm finding myself getting emotional, sitting there in the car listening to her. She said, that's my purpose. That's why I do this job. This was, I guess now it's been about 12 years ago. Purpose was not the lexicon of business then. That was something reserved for all those do-gooders who quit their job to go work, for some nonprofit and make no money. This wasn't what we're talking about in a science-based, high margin biotech company. But I got to thinking about it, got on the plane to come back, and I just kept turning it over and over in my head. And at that time, I had probably 20 years working, training all kinds of people. And I knew that it went beyond skills instinctively. We all know this. You all know this. Anybody who's been a parent knows this. And I knew there was something sitting underneath there. And I thought, is this the thing we've been looking for? Is it purpose? So I go back through the interviews and I found it. I found it in the anecdotal comments. The guy who says, my dad was a doctor. I just want to make the doctor's life better. The woman who says, I'm so excited about the science. So I found 5 people in all these interviews that alluded to this sense of higher purpose. Go back to the biotech company and they say, who do you think our top representatives are? I said, I think it's these 5. And y'all know where I'm going with this. I was right. And you're not surprised. So the next question is, how'd you know? So I didn't have the language at the time, and the language is everything. I didn't have the language, noble purpose. I'll tell you where I landed on that in a second. Okay. I said, well, they had a different story in their heart, which was correct. But I was speaking to a room of MBA and PhD scientists, and that language did not land that day.
Yeah. I can imagine. Yeah. So you're reading my mind, because I'm thinking, isn't it inherent in the word purpose?
Yes.
Noble. Right. I mean,
yes
why wouldn't you have a noble purpose just in the word purpose alone? So where did the word noble come from?
So I'm going to ask folks in the chat. I ask you to think about a time when you were at your best at work. Typically, it's when we have this sense that there are 2 things happening. We are part of something bigger than ourselves. Something that really matters. And the second thing is, we know that our individual contribution matters.
Yeah.
And it's those 2 lanes. So I did this meeting, totally blew the meeting. We've all been there, where you're talking and your words are just sliding across the conference table and landing with a clunk on the floor. So they say, how did you know? And I'm like, a different story in her heart. And then they are like, what? This is a science company. We don't talk that way. And then I'm like, well, there's this thing about this grandmother and this guy's dad, blah, blah, blah. So did not land it that day. But I knew I was seeing something, and I knew it was real. And I knew that if we could language it and scale it, we could create magic. So through time, I start to come up with this word purpose. And this is your question. I just finally decide, people had said for years, you should write a sales book, you should write a sales book. And I always said, I don't need to. There's tons of good sales books out there. I have nothing to add. There's tons of them. Go read Neil Rackham.
Or so you thought.
And so, but then when I landed on this, I realized this is what's missing, the emotional underpinning behind sales and the true north. So I'm going to write this book called Purpose Driven Selling. And this is like 10 years ago. And I don't know if you've read Purpose Driven Life. I'm sure Rick Warren is a lovely person, but he will sue your ass if you write purpose driven anything. So I realized I can't do that. So I'm sort of looking for the words to capture this sense of purpose. And I wanted it to be more than just purpose, because to your point, the purpose of most organizations, let's go back to Milton Friedman, God rest his cold, dead heart. He said the purpose of a business was to deliver a return to shareholder, which is how we got hijacked by shareholder primacy, which stripped all the meaning and life out of business and most of the competitive differentiation. We'll get to that in a second. But I knew that purpose alone was not enough, because purposely simply meant your end. So I had this meeting, and I didn't think it had anything to do with the book. I was meeting with the president of a large company. I was very excited. I had gotten this meeting. I had worked with their sales team years earlier. They were having a sales problem. The head of sales said, well, you need to call Lisa McLeod. President calls me in. I'm thinking, this is going to be great. I got called in. I mean, with the president, it's a woman. How often does that happen? We're going to have a great meeting. I'm going to secure this contract. And if you know anything about my story, you know that this was during the recession. And this is at a time when the family business, which was at the time not my consulting business, was having a lot of problems. So I think I'm going to get this big thing. It's going to be great. And so I talked to this woman, and she says, well, can you help me with sales? Absolutely. She goes, good, because we need to fix the compensation plan. I'm like, well, okay. And she says, these salespeople are like cash registers. You get the compensation plan right, and they will perform. And I knew her sales team, and they sold some medical equipment. I'm like, these people pack boxes, during the AIDS crisis at night. They're cash registers. So I blow that meeting too. I know this isn't going very well. I've blown 2 big meetings. And I'm on the way home, and I just am like, well, I think maybe it's something else, because I didn't quite have it yet. And then I came home, and I was really frustrated, and I was talking to a colleague of mine and venting, as we women do, about how badly this meeting's gone. And I said, she needs to understand sales is a noble profession. And it was one of those moments where the words come out of your mouth, and I'm sure you all have done this. The words come out of your mouth because you're annoyed and you're frustrated, and it finally coalesces in your mind. And I have sent that woman 1,000 blessings, because that word changed it. When I say that word, it embodied everything that I meant, everything that I meant, which is those 2 lanes. It's about something bigger than yourself.
Right.
And your contribution matters. Now, I've since seen that a lot of people think noble indicates that you don't make any money, and that is not true.
Well, and so I have to say that you've talked about pharmaceuticals, where there's life-changing, health-changing kinds of implications, medical equipment. What about the analyst?
Right.
Sitting in a cubicle, working in an IT department, and just cranking out, software or whatever. So how does someone like that discover their noble purpose?
I'm glad that you're bringing this up because people often think, well, I don't sell, life-changing arthritis drugs. And that's where I first spotted it because it was so clear. But what we've come to realize, and we have worked with accounting firms. So yes, we are having a conversation about noble purpose and emotional engagement with a bunch of accountants. And it's really interesting when you get into it. If you have a business and people are using your services, your widgets, whatever it may be, you have a noble purpose because they wouldn't be buying from you if it wasn't helpful. And so the answer to what is our noble purpose when we work through this with organizations, the answer is found in 3 questions. How do you make a difference? How do you do it differently? And on your best day, what do you love about your job? So if I'm sitting there doing my reports, the thing that happened, particularly during COVID, was people got removed from the sight line to how their work matters. And every day they come in and it feels like time to make the donuts, and I never get to see people eat the donuts. And yes. So these questions, how do you make a difference? How do you do it differently? And on your best day, what do you love about your job? What we find is a couple of things. One, people often don't realize the end result of their work. Like this is the business version of that movie, It's a Wonderful Life. They don't realize it. But when you get them in a room talking and they're like, oh my gosh, those reports help us sleep at night. Oh my gosh, if we don't have those, people can't close their loan. We're helping first-time homeowners. This software is helping people make better decisions. This is helping people, market their wares all over the world. There's always something, unless you are selling cigarettes to children. What you're doing has some inherent nobility because it is helping people do something.
It reminds me of that classic story, and I think it's in your book around, are you a bricklayer right. or are you a cathedral builder?
Right. That's it in a nutshell. And so this concept of noble purpose, I am so grateful and proud as a woman. I want to just own it here, but that I had the opportunity to do that study years before we were talking about purpose in business. And I like to think that I'm one of the people that helped us start talking about purpose in business. And I'm also so grateful to that one woman in that conversation. Isn't it funny how the universe just conspires if you're paying attention to get you in the right spot?
It is amazing how all the planet stars and all line up at once.
Right. And I often feel like when you're on the right lane, like you're banging your head. And then you get yourself in the right lane. The universe kind of looks and goes, oh, honey, I've been waiting on you. I got all this stuff I want to give you. And I've just been holding it until you decided to show up. About time.
Yep. Well, I want to ask you another question because you are known for your research, and then I want to get our listeners involved.
This is your warning. We're going to ask you guys to go to break.
Yes, we're going to ask you. Yes. So in your book, you quote the percent of unengaged workers. Now, this was a few years ago, but I think it's still the same, if not bigger. The percent of unengaged workers at the time was 51%, according to your book. And 17% were actively disengaged. So 51% unengaged, 17% actively disengaged, and only 32% actually found to be engaged.
Right.
So what did you find? What's driving those numbers?
So it's easy to put the blame on the work and the employer for this. And the employer is the one that it seems like has the most incentive to solve it, because you all are in this space. You're consumers. You know that disengaged employees erode your brand. They don't innovate. The productivity's down. We know all that. But what we often do not talk about is the heartbreaking human cost of this. this is how these people are spending their lives. And I, one of the things that is, I don't know if I want to say good, one of the benefits of being the age that I am is my parents are already dead. So I can talk about, and so are all their siblings. So I can talk about them and not worry that it's going to get back to me. I had 2 working parents. One loved their job and one did not like their job at all. And I saw the ripple effect on our whole family. And that's no shade on either of them. But the thing is, people are waking up every day dreading going to work. And what happened in the pandemic was the places that had a good work environment where people had to go home, and we don't have the free lattes. We don't have the pool table. We don't have the, always in a good mood coworker. It gets all stripped away and it becomes you and your work. And it became really obvious whether your work had meaning or not. And what I would say is part of this is on the employer, because the employer has a big incentive to help people find the meaning in the work. But a lot of it is on the individual contributor too. And an example I use is we've all been in a classroom. Many of us have children that have been in classrooms. It's the difference between a teacher who shows up believing that their noble purpose is to shape the future of the world, and a teacher who shows up believing he or she has to hit the test scores at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. And we all know that schools have pointed those teachers towards that second thing, the test scores. And it's been a big mistake. And we know what it's losing them. And we're losing them. We're losing the love of learning. We all know this. But because that thing is quantifiable, it's just like the money in business. Mm-hmm. Focus, focus, focus. But what we're focusing on is a lagging indicator. The test scores are a lagging indicator, just like the money's a lagging indicator. Instead, if we focus on how are you making a difference, it changes the dynamic. But the reason I bring this up is we also all know teachers who, despite all this stuff that's going on around them, they still have a sight line to those students and they still care passionately about making a difference to those students. Mm-hmm. Now, it'd be nice if we gave them the resources and the infrastructure and the leadership they had. But the reason I bring this up is part of it is the environment that leadership needs to create. And part of it is also the mindset that we can lean into ourselves no matter what's going on.
Mm. We could go on and on and on about that. But we really do want to involve everyone here.
Yeah.
So we have a question, and I think it's been posed already.
Yeah.
We want you to ponder it in breakout rooms with a couple of other people, and then enter your responses into the chat.
Yeah.
We're going to give you 6 minutes to do that. So remind us, Lisa, what is the question?
So here's the question. It's a very simple question. How do you make a difference? How does your work, and I don't just mean your company, I mean, how does your individual work make a difference? And I'll tell you very specifically why we're asking this. Is there's some brain science behind this. If I ask what you do and you recite the company purpose and all, that's great, but you're probably using your middle brain. To ignite emotional engagement, we want you to use your frontal lobes. And when you have specificity, there's a chapter in one of the books called Specificity is Sexy. If I talk generically about, I help students improve math, I might be okay. But if I talk about an individual student that now understands the structure of the way numbers work, and they're going to carry that with them for the rest of their life, I'm going to feel different in that moment. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're asking you to do. And if you think your work doesn't make a difference, go ahead and say it to your group, because I guarantee you someone in your group will go, are you kidding me? Do you know how much you help this? So we want you to have a conversation giving voice to this, to how do you make a difference in your job? Because what that does for us as individual humans is it pulls it front and center. And after you do that, I'm going to tell you what some of the benefits are of talking about this on a regular basis.
All right.
So we're going to send them for 6 minutes.
Yes, 6 minutes, and then we'll bring you back. But put your answers in chat. So I still see people. Hopefully they're
They're the ones that were getting their kids off to school while this was
That's right.
in the background.
That's right. So I see Kathy. Corrine, do we have everybody in their respective rooms?
Not yet.
Okay.
Most of the groups are filled though.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to turn my camera off, grab a cup of coffee,
Please do.
run to the restroom.
All right. We'll
Do you think we're going to, well?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Okay. I'll be right back.
All right. Corrine, perhaps those who have not accepted an invitation, we can go ahead and just place them. I chose not to go to a breakout room so I could monitor the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I've assigned everyone a breakout room, so it has to be up to them to accept it and enter it. I can't make them enter it.
Okay. All right.
Hi, Anne. The question was, what is your noble purpose, right?
What brings you greatest meaning
What brings you
and
greatest?
purpose in your work?
Okay.
Or how does your work make a difference? I'm sorry. How does your work make a difference? What brings you? It's the same question.
Okay.
Thank you, Eve.
So how does your work?
Make a difference.
Can I broadcast that message, or are you doing that, Eve?
I'm doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. Come back. Send it out.
That
So
was
it's
fast. That was fast.
I'm in a contained area here.
Are you at, did you say you're at home?
Yeah, this is my home office.
And is it in Atlanta?
I live outside of Atlanta. I live at Lake Oconee.
Oh, that's right. We talked about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I moved out here a couple of years before the pandemic, and then ended up being very happy that I was
Yes.
here.
I would think so.
Yeah.
And does your daughter live nearby?
She lives in Macon. My daughter that works with me. Yeah, she
Mhm.
lives in Macon. So it's about an hour and 15 minutes away. When she first came to work with me, she lived in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And we, it was fine. And then her then boyfriend and she decided they wanted to move to Atlanta, which was a big move because he was from Boston.
Yeah.
And they had gone to school there. So I was very happy about that. And then he ended up getting a job in Macon. So that's how they ended up there.
I shared her letter with a group of people that I was meeting with.
Oh,
and
that
they all wanted
millennial letter?
copies. Oh, yes. It's, it was written, in 2015? And
She,
it so resonates with everybody
it does.
7, 8 years later.
Well, it's because that's the way they feel.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't, it hasn't, it's how that generation feels. And she wrote that letter a week after she came to work with me. And the reason she came to work with me, I talk about sending that woman who was so negative 1,000 blessings. There is a highly egotistical ad agency owner in Boston that I have sent 1,000 blessings to because he was such a bad boss. I finally convinced her to come and work with me. If he had been just a little bit better boss, I probably couldn't have talked her into
So
it.
there was a story behind all of that.
Oh, yeah.
It was a bit of an emotional letting. Well,
Yeah, there
it needed to
definitely
be
was.
said, though. It needed to be said.
But she also, because by that point I had already written Selling with Noble Purpose, and I was trying to get Leading with Noble, the first edition, and I was trying to get Leading with Noble Purpose over the line. And I was a little bit overworked and I had a big project with Google, and I was trying to get this book over the line. I said, if you just come to work with me for a year, this will be a great experience. You'll get to work with Google. You'll help get this book over the line. And so she was intimately familiar with the Noble Purpose work. And once you know it and you go to work somewhere else, it's kind of like once you've worn good shoes, you can't unknow it.
And you know what? It has colored my perspective in every coaching engagement.
Oh, wow.
It really has. I mean, and I facilitated 2 more minutes. I facilitated a session with an organization that has just gone through a restructuring and just announced their layoffs.
Mhm.
So they had the smaller group of their professionals together so that we could facilitate them, help them to process.
Yeah.
And so I started out with, and they have an amazing purpose, noble purpose.
Nice.
It's a startup. So they have a really great noble purpose. So I started with that and said, your story is amazing.
You should say that when we come back. Can I ask you about that?
Sure.
Because what's interesting and important about that is it gives you something to tether to when things go wrong.
So
That
true.
Something concrete. Because the finances and the business conditions,
Right.
those are out of your control.
Right. Right.
I mean, again, it's just like I often liken it to parenting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'll ask you that.
Okay.
So breakout rooms are done. Okay.
So we welcome back as you're coming back. Hopefully you're going to, or you have, I'm not seeing any responses. What did you discuss? Please put that in chat. What did you discover? I invite you to.
How do you make a difference at work?
Yeah, how do you make a difference at work? If you could.
Breakout rooms are still open. They'll close in 2 seconds.
Oh, thank
okay.
you.
Yeah.
Hello, Susan. Can't hear you.
Hello.
She's muted. That's right. We've got everybody muted.
Yeah. Welcome back. Welcome back. We
Yes.
would ask you in the chat you can either put your own answer to the question, how do you make a difference at work? Or if you heard a good answer, you can give somebody a shout out and say how they make a difference at work. So, Anne, we were talking about this as we see, hopefully some folks will put some good answers in here.
Mm-hmm.
You and I were talking at the break. So if you can't tell it, we're flipping it. I'm going to ask Anne a question. You said that you had just had a client that had gone through a very difficult time. They had some layoffs. It was challenging. And you brought them back together.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine folks are dispirited, but
Right.
you went to what's your true and noble purpose? Why did you choose to go to that? Because I think your instincts were great there.
Well, we started out because it was the facilitated session that I was facilitating happened right after the announcement.
Yeah.
So these folks had not had an opportunity to really process all the major change that was happening.
Mhm.
And so I began with the fact that when it was true, I had studied their story of this
Yeah.
startup and what a noble purpose that they had that was just so meaningful and should be so meaningful. And so even though this is a difficult time,
Mhm.
that there's still that Northern Star out there.
Right.
Northern Star lives on. And
Well,
how important it is to recognize that.
and to reset to that. I realize we asked a very big question in the chat. So Susan put helping others develop, especially leadership, especially in women, mentoring young women. You can just put, I love this, Susan. So thank you. You all can put a very short answer into the chat in terms of how you make a difference. And it can be anything from, Ann and I talked beforehand about a client of hers was in the security business, talking about helping people feel secure. And security is more than logistics, it's an emotion. So it can be anything. Just how I want you to think about how you make a difference. And the reason to give voice to this is for two very distinct reasons. And Ann just hit on one of them. I'm going to tell the first reason, then we're going to go to what you said, Ann. The first reason that it's so important to give voice to this is this becomes the true north of our organization and the organizing principle of our organization. And if the profit is not a purpose, purpose is an outcome. Profit matters. I want to make money. All my clients want to make money. Our company purpose is to drive revenue and help people do work that makes them proud. So we are operating on a financial lane. But the reason that you have the true north of your job or of the total company, they need to kind of fit together. I see helping others develop, inspiring positivity. That's what's going to drive the innovation. That's what's going to drive your offering. So if we all sit around a room saying, how can we make more money? We're not going to come up with anything really good. Right. But if we sit in a room, we get a bunch of people in a room saying, how can we improve life for customers? How can we improve life for our constituents, whatever it may be? That is how we innovate. And you mentioned a startup. All startups were founded on an idea, a need that someone saw, a gap in the market. But what happens is it erodes over time. And you just hit on the second reason we all need this. There's going to be some bad days. The work conditions are going to go bad. The economy is going to go bad. The finances are going to go up and down. And that true north of knowing I am here to help people understand finances. Mm-hmm. I'm here to help to welcome people into our company. I'm here to help team members grow. I can always do that. Even if everything goes to crap, I can always do that. And I used to not talk about parenting that much, even though it was a very important aspect of my life. And I've since sort of lifted the veil. And in a women's group, you all know why I don't talk about parenting that much. Because the second you see me as a mommy, you cease to see me as a leader. So somebody's got to change that. So, yeah. Huh. Oh, yeah. So I will tell a funny story about this. That is an old story that I have in my head. It's not incorrect. It was based on a reality that I was living. And so I will tell you a funny story. I was coaching a senior leader in an organization, and it was a startup, and he was going through a difficult situation. And at the end of the coaching session, he said, this was so helpful. He said, in some ways, you kind of remind me of my mom. And I was like, oh, jeez. I knew he meant it as a compliment, but it reminded me, I'm that old. Yeah, you're 35 and I'm well into my 50s. So yeah, there. But I also took that comment to mean you're sweet, you're nice, you're supportive, you're a backstage person with all this mommy stuff that we have in our heads. I knew he meant it well, but I took it that way. Flash forward a year later, I'm going to one of their board meetings and they go, well, you're going to be, at 10:30. Kevin's mom is going at 10. this leader I'm coaching. I go, Kevin's mom's at your board meeting? They go, oh yeah, she is a badass attorney. She's the one that got our patents. She helped us start this thing. And I'm sitting there in the meeting and I'm like Kevin's mom. Oh yeah, I'm like Kevin's mom. And so the reason I say this as a prelude to what I'm about to say about parenting is my story was old, and it was based on a lot of men my age who thought a certain way about women. And we know there's good men out there. And we also know that we're all products of our culture and our sociological programming. There is a set of younger men who are now in charge who have badass moms like Kevin's mom. And they think about it totally differently. And so what I'm about to say about parenting is there's not a person on the planet who would not make the case that parenting is a noble purpose and it matters. And the way we parent has a direct impact on the world we're going to live in 20 years from now. The way you parent, I parent, those are the people that are going to create the future world. So we all know that raising compassionate, smart, committed citizens who don't have, who are free from shame and angst and can go do big things. So we all know that matters. We know it's a noble purpose. We also know that there's some really crummy days in parenting. We all know that. And so the reason I share this is work is no different. Leadership is leadership, no matter where you practice it. And we know as a parent, when you come home and you're tired and you're cranky, your ability to not be perfect, but to know how I treat these people matters in this moment. Mm-hmm. Their observations of how I treat myself matters in this one, because it doesn't mean be perfect. It doesn't mean do everything. It means, what do I want some future leaders to see and know about me? That has the ability to ground us on the bad days in parenting. And the same thing happens at work. And it doesn't mean you have to be perfect. Sometimes it means you have to say, I'm having a really bad day and need to take a break here.
Yes.
Because this cause is bigger than me. And if I keep banging my head against this, I'm going to start to hate this thing that I was once excited about. I would say work is kind of like cake. I love cake. And if I have a great piece of cake, it's awesome. If I have a second piece of cake, it's pretty good. If I eat a whole cake, I don't like cake.
Yeah. But as you mentioned, it's that ability to tether your effort, your energy, the work, all that you're doing to something greater than yourself. Yes. And so we great responses here. And most of our participants today are women. And you have an interesting viewpoint about what women bring to the work culture and why noble purpose resonates with women more so in particular. Would you share that?
It's interesting. I'll tell you the part that resonates, and I'm using some generalities here. Okay. So I'm not saying all women, I just to get that out of the way. The emotional language is something that women are more fluid in. The language and the naming emotions and the understanding that there's an emotional underpinning on everything that drives much of what happens up here. We are more fluid in that because we've been schooled in it, the way our brains work, all kinds of things. I will also say, before I get to this thing about women, I did not know when I landed on that word noble, how important that word was going to be to men and how much that word was going to land with men, because in different ways, and again, I'm using some generalities. I'm mostly talking about, cis people and the ways that we've been schooled to be in the world. Most people are walking around feeling unappreciated at work. Most people are walking around feeling unappreciated in life. And this idea that what I'm doing is noble helps me get over those feelings of lack of appreciation, because it tells me that it is going to count for something, even if nobody notices. But the thing about the emotional engagement, so I am confident in this call of women that I am not the only one that has heard or been told directly, let's not get emotional here. Let's not get too emotional. And what people mean, I've come to realize when they say that, is two things. Please don't be angry because I don't know what to do. Or please don't cry in my office because then I really don't know what to do. And so one of the things that I often say in those environments where people are saying, let's not get emotional, is I have yet to meet a CEO who said, you know what, I wish my people didn't care so much. I wish these people weren't so doggone excited about their work. Emotions drive our behavior. We know that. The research is out there. And so what women have an opportunity to do is to be the experts in this. And so I'm going to ask on a show, I'm going to ask in the chat, how many of you have ever been taught, especially early in our careers, something valuable by a man at work? And so I'm going to give you two examples. My father taught me how to walk in and shake hands. And we practiced it at home. You look him in the eye, you walk in, this is how you do it. I walked in and shook hands with a guy that owned a Donut King when I was 14. I got a job. He said, this is how you do it. My mother didn't teach me that. Now a mother could teach it, but a man teaching me that. That was man's language. I had an early boss who said, when you walk up to the front of the room, you need to very declaratively say, I'm delighted to be with you all today. This is what we're going to be talking about, because they need to see that you are confident and excited. And that was something a lot of women went in. Thank you so much for having me. That would have been me. I'm so appreciative. No, I did that once. He's like, no, I'm delighted to be here. Let me tell you what we're going to talk about. So why do I bring this up? And again, I'm making some generalities here, because a lot of us women are annoyed that men don't get it. That the emotions matter. You have the language of emotions. Well, this is the chance for us to do what some men have done for us. A male supervisor taught me to look people in the eye and be brief. Yes, this is the chance for us to introduce and be fluid in this language as women. And we don't need to say, as a woman, I understand what emotions mean and how to label it. We don't need to say that. We just need to say things confidently in meetings like, we know from our own experience and all the research that the emotions drive a lot of behavior. So I think it'd be important for us right now to have a conversation about how we can improve the emotional set point of our team. Just say it with absolute confidence, not maybe kind of sort of. And I'm looking at myself in the camera going, okay, Lisa, don't forget this on your next meeting. So my dad taught me that hard work always pays off. Yeah. And so we have lessons that we have learned from a generation of men who were generally older than us. And they came because they said, I've been in this place called the workforce, and I know what works here. Now, some of what we need to let go of some of that. But I'm talking about on their best day, the best men who have helped us said, this is what works here. We, when we're little girls, our games are more social. And again, I'm making generalities here. And the only reason I'm doing generalities is not to say that every woman needs to be this way, but to say that as women, generally speaking, we've got some training and some skills that are really valuable.
Sure.
Really valuable.
I remember my first large-scale leadership role.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to go and speak before this large employee group.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was nervous as all get out. And I remember my male leader, my male boss, saying to me, just remember, Ann, you know a lot more than they do.
Yes.
And and I think it was just because I wanted to be sure I had all the answers, right? What if they asked me a tough question, hardball question, what will I say? He said, you know all the answers.
Oh.
You know more than they do. You don't have to have all the answers, but you do know more.
What you just said here, the nuance of that, I hope every woman in the world could hear this. On this subject, you know more than they do. You don't, but the nuance is you don't have to have the answer to every question.
That's right.
We have all seen lots of evidence on lots of big public stages where the smartest woman in the room doesn't always get the job.
Mhm.
So having all the answers and proving that you're the smartest one doesn't win the day every time.
Mhm.
But we have been so schooled in, I'm going to be the straight A student. I'm going to show I can do this. I'm going to show I can do that. I can't tell you how many sales organizations where I have walked down the halls back when I used to leave the house and seen the names of the top sales reps, and over half of them, sometimes 75% of them are women. And then I get to the executive offices and I go, where are all the women? They're not there. And so this idea that somehow we are going to have every single answer and we're going to check all the boxes and that's going to win us the day has been proven wrong again and again. But this Ginny says it, a reframe. Women have the opportunity to take leadership in the area of emotions. They absolutely do. And we don't need to make a big deal of it. We don't need to make a big deal of saying, well, as a woman, I know this. But when you are a person who is respected in your organization, when I walk into a company and I've been called in, so there's some level of respect, I'm already in there. When I say with confidence, we want to reframe the true north of this organization, and we want to get people emotionally engaged. And there is a language and tools that you can do that. Almost every man in the room is like, oh, thank God there's a formula for this. Please tell us, because this is the most baffling thing I've ever seen. And when we say we can do a psychological and emotional reset of this organization and take it from here to here. And I use language like, and I don't have to tell you why doing that is going to improve your work product. It's going to drive more engagement, because we all know that people who are emotionally engaged outperform people who are just phoning it in. So let's talk about the language we can use to get our people emotionally engaged. Like just with confidence. I mean, it's taken me a long time to get there, but not maybe the emotions. And we also need to understand that the emotions and the money, they're not two distinctly different things. The happiness and the money, the noble purpose and the money, no. The money and the performance metrics are lagging indicators. They are always lagging indicators. They are the result of the belief first of the people in the room, in the company, and then the result of their behaviors. Now, you've got to have your back end right. You can't give away the store. You've got to have a profitable business model, but that's just table stakes.
Yeah. And in fact, in your book, I wanted to get to some of these interesting stories that you tell about how particular leaders that you worked with organizations, they named it and claimed it, as you put it, their purpose, their noble purpose. And yet they were under a lot of pressure around profitability.
Right.
But you help them to reframe it as purpose over profits, purpose over profits. So can you give us an example or some stories of some organizations and leaders who were successful both with profits and because they had named and claimed their purpose, and how they socialized that purpose?
Yeah. So I'll give you 2 examples. The first one I'm going to go to is a plumbing supply house. Blue collar, gritty, tough business. They do plumbing and HVAC. So we got a lot of people here working in this business. Some are in showrooms, some are out, mucking out, people's, in the attic and doing all this stuff in commercials. So you might think that plumbing is not a noble purpose. Well, you try and live your life without it. See how far you get. So this was an organization. They're in the book. They're in the leading book, Bender Plumbing. And their purpose is really simple. We create solutions for comfortable living. It's super simple. But what that does is that ignites a different set of behaviors from the people. So you've got this guy who started this business as a plumber, 50 years ago, standing up there. Now imagine the difference between this guy standing up there saying, okay, this year we're going to sell 10,000 toilets, 25,000 sinks. We're going to repipe this many houses. But imagine him standing up there saying, there's 25,000 people out there right now that if we do our work right at the end of this year, they're going to walk into a beautiful kitchen. They're going to love being with their family in that kitchen. They're going to have a great bathroom. They're going to start their day in a wonderful, comfortable way. There are 10,000 businesses out there that if we do our work right this year, are going to have a constant temperature. People aren't going to be sweating at work. People aren't going to be freezing at work because we have created the environment for those people to be successful. And when you send the billing, when you inventory the supply house, that is all contributing to that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different story for the people. And so one of the things that we do when we work with leaders, and I'll go to another company in a second, is we look at the leadership airtime. When leaders are with their teams, how are they spending their airtime? If the majority of the time is around the numbers, and the numbers matter, but if the majority of the time is around the numbers, you will not have the emotional engagement. You will not drive innovation. And so we've got a great story in the book about Monster.com and how Monster was once a noble purpose company. It was founded by a gentleman named Jeff Taylor up in Boston. He and his colleagues were early innovators of the internet. And Monster.com was founded on the belief that everybody deserved a great job. Everybody deserved a great job. And so they used this new thing called the internet to help people find great jobs. And they were a job board. Everyone heard of them. They did those when I grew up ads. They were great and they're in Super Bowl. And if you look at the transcripts from their meetings, they would bring in people and they would bring in, look at Susan. Susan used to be living in her mama's basement, didn't have a job, but now, thanks to Monster, Susan wakes up and goes to work every day. Woohoo! Let's meet Ann. Ann hired 25 great people. Woohoo! They were the darling of the internet. They were a top 20 tech stock. They were one of the top 20 most visited websites in the world. So why am I telling you this? Because no one's heard of Monster today. A bunch of young people are like, who the heck is that? What happened was they got taken over. The original founders left, as often happens. And the new people that came in weren't bad people, but they didn't have that feeling. They viewed the business very transactional. So if you look at the transcripts from their town halls, you can see they went from talking about how they made a difference about half the time. You don't have to talk about it all the time, just half the time, to talking about financials all the time. And so when all you talk about is financials, the employees get the message, you were a cog in a money wheel. You were a cog in a money wheel. And they got out innovated. Everyone says that. I've got a piece on Forbes that I wrote when Monster went under, and it was how Monster lost their mojo. Everyone says they got out innovated by LinkedIn. That's true. But the reason they got out innovated by LinkedIn is because all the people at LinkedIn were sitting in a room going, how can we help people find better jobs? And all the people at Monster were sitting in a room going, how can we make more money? And so that's kind of a before an example, after example. Another example that I might share is right here in Atlanta, Atlantic Capital Bank. And we got hired by Doug Williams, the CEO of Atlantic Capital, a commercial bank in Atlanta. And they were a great company. When you talk to people individually, they would talk about how they were helping business owners grow their business. They were helping people with jobs, but there was no shared story. You had to dig down. So we landed on the purpose, we fuel prosperity. And I know when you say it was really good.
Oh, that's good.
Because that says prosperity is a more benevolent word than just we help people make money.
Yeah. Yeah.
We help people make monies in that, but
Right.
It's bigger. And so then we trained every single person in the whole company on what does that mean? Here's some examples of customers we've done this with. Here's the dry cleaning business. Here's the commercial developer. And again, they're not feeding the poor here. I mean, if that's your jam, yay. But someone has to do the regular business. And what we showed them was the regular business has a noble purpose and has positive impact. Then we did sales training with all the people. So imagine I'm your banker and you're talking to a couple bankers, and someone else comes in and says, let me see your P&L. We'll decide if we're going to lend you money. Here's our rates. And I'm from Atlantic Capital, and I come in and I say, tell me about your business, Ann. What does prosperous look like to you? How can we help get you there? We're having a totally different conversation. So flash forward, they've increased their earnings. Doug Williams is on the cover of American Banker as the Banker of the Year. They're voted a best place to work. And it all came not just from those words, we fuel prosperity, but the true north. They named it and claimed it. And then we trained every single person in that company on how do you show up in this way.
That is exactly what we needed to hear. Thank you very much. So I'm thinking we should go ahead and open it up to questions from everyone.
Sure.
So if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand either through the raise the hand function, or go ahead and physically raise your hand. But I'd love to hear from you. What questions do you have for Lisa?
So I have a question for you, Ann, first.
Oh, okay.
This work is obviously very personal to me, and it's hard for me to see why companies wouldn't do this. Why do you think? And they usually don't tell me why they don't want to do it because they know I'm so excited about it. Why do you think this is hard for people?
Well, I always say they can't, won't, or don't know how. So they can't because they just don't have that emotional connection to the ability. The can't comes from it. Just don't have that emotional connection with the people, the purpose, whatever it is, the passion. They won't because they're just not motivated. They're more motivated by profits. And, if you've got a lot of investors that are
right.
So they may not because they won't, or they just don't know how. No one's, they've never had the training, the education, the consulting, whatever, on how to do that. Yeah.
You go ahead and put questions in the chat if you all have questions, and I
go
will
ahead and do. Yeah, we'll do that too.
But what's interesting is you just made me think of something that I hadn't really connected the dots on before when you talked about investors. And people are complex. We're motivated by a lot of things, and we can lean into one thing or the other. And it has taken me some time to become fluid in the financial indicators of business and to really understand that financial pressure, what that feels like. And I had an experience, if you know my story, I talk about a good bit, in the recession in 2009. I had my training business, but it was very much a boutique business. And candidly, I was not the primary earner in my family. I had young children. I was not the primary earner. My business kind of went up and down, and there wasn't a lot of financial stress attached to that. And my husband had been an executive with an Atlanta-based company. He'd left there and went out, and we bought a business probably the day before the recession started.
Great timing.
So we made a bad decision in an unforgiving market. And long story short, it was a small manufacturing company tied to the construction industry. It went belly up, and we had to declare bankruptcy. It was terrible. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. But I then became the family breadwinner. And so probably for the first time in my adult life, when I had other people counting on me, I had to really reconcile these two lanes. because the need for money was very real and very, I mean, it felt like a boot on my neck. And so I think a lot of times in the past, when I had said, well, it shouldn't be about the money, I think I kind of had the view from what I call the cheap seats. But when I was facing looming debt with the IRS, someone who'd gotten into a very good college and expected it to at least be somewhat fueled by her parents,
Right.
like that was a game changer. And so I think the idea that what you said about people are motivated by money, greed is real. But I also think that a lot of people, if you came up as an MBA, I used to be embarrassed I didn't have an MBA. Now I'm glad. If you came up as an MBA, you were schooled in this is the purpose of business, this Milton Friedman model, and it's shareholder primacy, and that's your job, and you got to deliver a return to shareholders. If you're in a publicly traded company, that's real. If you're a parent trying to provide for your family, that's real. And also, it's okay to want a nice life for yourself. So I think a lot of times we put people, and they have put themselves in that money category because it's the way they were trained. And we need to show that this is additive. And so I'll take this question from Aaron, who says, how do we think about or reconcile different values? What is purposeful for one may not be for another. What thoughts do you have on helping others find it when it's different? Okay, this is very good. So the thing that we all need to understand is, I talked about that, those two lanes for humans, part of something bigger than ourselves, and our contribution matters. Everyone has the need for belonging and significance. Transcends age, race, culture, time. Belonging and significance. We want to be part of something bigger than ourselves, and we want to know that our contribution matters. And so that question, how do you make a difference, gives people the ability to give voice to their aspirations. And so a lot of times we create these silos. Well, all they care about is the money. Like I've had the finance people where everyone's like, well, Phil will never agree because all he cares about is the money. And then you go talk to Phil, and Phil is like, I have to safeguard the money or this place will go broke. And I'm almost every person that I've met, when I get into it and say, how do you make a difference and why does your work matter? There's something there. And I may have interpreted their behavior negatively, but it's generally not. Susan has her hand raised. So you want to say something, Susan?
Yeah, Susan.
I think I'm unmuted, right?
Yes.
I guess what I was sitting here thinking is, given the fact that so many of the younger generation, I think, are coming along with the, desire to make a difference, to change the world, et cetera, et cetera. Don't you think that employers, organizations of all kinds, if there was ever a driver to get on the purpose wagon, this would be it? Because if they don't, it would seem to me the future could be pretty bleak. Because, people are not going to stay with you for a long time. If they're not excited about it and don't feel good about it, and there's not something in it. It seems to me that this generation, the newer generations, are going to change everything.
They absolutely are. And this whole thing about people don't want to work, I'm calling bullshit. Everybody's saying that. They maybe don't want to work for you, but people do want to work. Because here's the difference in this younger generation. We all want that sense of meaning at work. A lot of people my age traded it for money. The younger generation is not having it. And the reason why is they were all raised with, you're special, you're going to change the world. And they believed us. And so now they're saying, I'm not going to show up for some transactional job. And so what happens when you have purpose, to Susan's point, without it, you're going to get the people who are just what I call phoning it in, who are just showing up. Here we go. Let's just have this job for a paycheck. Because what the research tells us is, in top performers, purpose is innate. They want it. And it has become a decision-making criteria. And so one of the things that happened during COVID, when I mentioned we all went home, and had the chance to really say, does this work matter? Agree about the younger generation. Yeah. And go for them. You know, my grandmother's age were the people that said I shouldn't have to work in a sweatshop 80 hours a week, and they made work better for all of us. So these people are saying emotional engagement matters. And just put a link to an article that my business partner and also daughter wrote, Why Millennials Keep Dumping. That's still one of my favorite pieces. It's hilarious. But where I want to make the point with this about decision making is during COVID, everybody went home, and something psychological happened during COVID that, to my best recollection, the last time this happened collectively in America was World War II. World War II, a couple of important things happened. World War II set the seeds for the women's movement and the civil rights movement. And we don't often connect those. But what happened in World War II is all the women went to work in the factories. And they're looking at each other going, we built a bomber, ladies. We are not so dumb. And all the men of color went to go serve their country and said, guess what? We fought for this too. And so while those people didn't necessarily collectively fuel those movements, they raised their children differently, and their children did. So what's happened now is everybody in COVID went home and had the chance to think, how am I spending my time? How am I spending my life? Because I'm not getting another one. And I don't want to spend my days doing something that doesn't matter. The other thing that started happening was customers started asking, are you here to help me? Or are you just here to close me? And so in addition to employees needing to know this work matters, your story for the market, if it's just we're some transactional company that's just doing a money grab, you will not have any competitive differentiation. Your customers will be wise to it. The thing that makes me sad is a lot of companies are doing work that matters. The accountants, the plumbers, but they're not giving voice to it. And so their people aren't seeing it.
Yes. In fact, you tell a great story or relate what happened. I think it was Leading with Noble Purpose. Once the first editions were out there, you were getting letters from workers saying, I get this, but my boss doesn't.
But my boss doesn't. So I would get these. I have had this experience multiple times where the employees will say, well, I really get this, but my boss doesn't. And then I'll sit with the boss, and the boss says, see, I really get this, but the employees don't. And so I'm going to tell a story about what became obvious to me. And as I said, I've now taken the lid off. I'm going to talk about parenting. So many years ago, I went into my daughter's kindergarten class and was the parent volunteer. And I was a parent volunteer on a regular basis. So I'd gotten to know the kids. Well, this is a story about leadership. We get to close to the end of the year. The kids are all making presents for their mothers for Mother's Day. And I'm the classroom helper. And the teacher has given the kids a prompt because the kids are making these little books for their mothers. And the prompt is, what are your mommy's favorite things to do? And so class of 5 and 6-year-olds, they can write a word or two, or they can draw a picture about their mommy's favorite things. So my high-tech job is to take these pieces of paper, staple them, put a ribbon on them, make them into a book. Naturally, I read them all. So class of 5 and 6-year-olds, across the board, almost all of them have said there's 2 things in common. My mommy's favorite things to do, almost all of them have this in their little book, cleaning and sleeping. So I ask, tell me about this mommy of yours. Why does she love that so much? How do you know her favorite things are cleaning and sleeping? Well, she talks about it all the time. She's always saying, we've got to clean up around here. It is such a mess. We have got to clean up. And if she's not saying that, she's, I'm so tired. I'm so tired. They must be her favorite thing. She talks about them all the time. The words of the leader tell the team what's important. Mm-hmm. And no one knows what's in your heart unless you share it. And so this dynamic I get where people are saying, well, I care about this, but my boss doesn't. All the way up to the CEO. Well, I know why I founded this company, but they don't. Is because no one's giving voice to it. And the lexicon, the vernacular, is about numbers and efficiency metrics. And it's a big mistake. And the beauty of this is when you start to give voice to how we make a difference, you don't have to wait for your boss to do it. I have had people in organizations where you go over all the sales numbers and somebody says, you know what, we closed 100 customers. Can I take 2 minutes and tell you about one of them and how our work matters? You can be the lowest person in the room and say that. You can just say to your boss beforehand, we've got a customer that's super excited. I want to tell you, not how we closed it, how much money we're making, all that matters. You're covering that story. But I want to tell the team how our software is making a difference to these people. And it's a sight line towards the impact. And when you start talking that way, it is contagious. It is absolutely contagious. The room will come alive. And it's not what bells and whistles did they use? What were all the specifics? We usually have 2 stories in business. The win story about how we made all this money and we're great. The use case story about all the technical specs. But when we start telling what I call impact stories, and they can be customer impact stories, employee impact stories, where the focus is on how we made a difference. When we start telling those, the whole room, their frontal lobes will light up.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I have a good acquaintance who leads safety, and he will always address the board by saying all of the numbers about all the injuries and so on and so forth. But he always closes it by saying, fortunately, we have 100 people that went back home to their families the same way as they left them that morning.
Yeah.
And so, always puts that impact story around it. It makes a big difference. Yes.
And it's one sentence. It is literally one sentence.
Well, we've come to I'm afraid, this has gone so fast, but we have come towards the end, and we want to leave enough time for you to tell us, what is the one thing out of all of this, the one thing you hope that we'll take away from our conversation this morning?
You don't have to choose between making money and making a difference. The profit and the purpose are connected. Not only can you have both, you deserve both. You are going to spend a lot of your life at work. It should matter. It should matter. You deserve that.
Well, Lisa, we'll just leave it at that. Let's just drop the mic. That was amazing. And again, thank you so much. 10,000 blessings your way, my dear. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to everyone for participating today. Great day.
Yeah, thanks for kicking off this new year, Lisa. That's terrific.
Amen.